Good morning. I'm here to lift up another woman, and I want to lift up Queen Esther. So now we all know that story. Queen Esther was being raised by one of her relatives. Her parents were deceased, and there goes Mr. Squeaky. Queen Esther was raised by her relative Mordecai. What's interesting about Queen Esther is she only became queen because of the blatant disrespect of Queen Vashti, who, while pregnant, most believe she was pregnant, was asked to parade herself through all of the other people that were there visiting King Ahasuerus. And she said no. Squeaky, really? What is this morning? Okay. She said no. Vashti said no. Now, according to the Midrash, Ahasuerus had Vashti killed. And that's the Midrash. I had never read that in any other text, but according to them, after her disrespect, he had her killed. So also the Midrash says that Esther hid herself because after Vashti was dethroned as queen, Ahasuerus begins to look for another queen. Let me get a little coffee. Begins to look for another queen. Mordecai is the relative who raised Esther. And it says that she hid herself for like 4 years. But eventually she is discovered. Undoubtedly, she was very beautiful, things like that, and from the tribe of Benjamin. So I call this the first beauty pageant, maybe recorded beauty pageant. I'm sure they had plenty as men put women on display to say who was the prettiest, who was this, who was that. But this seemed like a beauty pageant. So when they would present one of the women to the king, you knew she was not going to be queen if he were to sleep with her and not call her queen. She became a concubine. So Esther, of course, becomes queen, and many things go on. The politics are unbelievable because one of the servants of Ahasuerus, Haman, didn't like Mordecai, who was her uncle, and was always plotting to kill and things like that. Just a horrible, scheming and devious person, and was willing to use his position before the king to eliminate an entire group of people. Esther, however, once she became queen, of course, she's trying to also keep her Jewish customs. So according to the Midrash, Esther had 7 servants, and those servants would come, not the same one every day, but a different day, so she could keep up with which day was the Sabbath. Then she was able to practice, and then of course Mordecai kept her up with the certain physical things a Jewish woman must honor in relational dynamics. So that's a whole other thing with the purity and 7 days after this and 3 days. It's a whole other thing. But Esther kept up with all those things. But she knew she had favor with the king. After all, he chose her to be queen. After all those beautiful women were paraded in front of him, he chose the little Jewish girl who was there. Probably this was 100 years after the Babylonian captivity. So this happened in Persia about 100 years after the Babylonian captivity. So the Jewish people had returned to the area they called Israel. They had returned already, but they were still residing in Persia. So Haman decides to get the king to go against the Jewish people. Mind you, Esther never walked in and said, "I'm Jewish." She never said, "Hey, this is who I am." She kept who she was, that personal, intimate part she had with her God. She didn't sit there and, "Oh, God talks to me and God has given me favor and God has taken me from being an orphan." She didn't do none of that. She was low key worshiping her God. And she never went to her king and said, "Look, I'm Jewish. We need to change the whole nation's faith and all that." She didn't try to control everyone else through her own personal worship. That's what I'm saying. And Haman says, let's do all these gallows and let's give people free will to kill the Jewish people and hang them and do all these things. But Haman also did not like her uncle Mordecai. He was trying to get everybody. Haman was just like, no, I'm going to get them. I'm going to get him. But no one knew that sitting right there in the palace was a Jewish woman. And Esther goes to Ahasuerus and finally says, look, I love that she had Haman over for dinner too. Just saying, she had him over for dinner. I need some more coffee, guys. Had him over for dinner. And they're having this thing. And she starts talking about how somebody's trying to kill her and kill her people and do stuff. And Haman is sitting there. And finally she says, basically it's him. I'm Jewish. He's had you put out a decree to kill all the Jewish people. And the very gallows that he had built, he hung on one of them. So, don't worry about it when people, sometimes we fret because we know people plot and do all type of things in the workplace, in family, in the church. Let's just say it, in the church as well. There's plotting and scheming. And sometimes people leave enough rope just to hang themselves. So on this Tuesday, be like Queen Esther. Know who you are in God and don't feel like you got to tell everybody who you are in God. But when God calls you to come forward and to speak, then be ready to say all of who you are in your Creator. That's what Esther did. Esther was a little girl who didn't think anything about what her aspirations were not to be queen. I'm sure a lot of the people that paraded up there, they wanted to be queen. They ended up being a concubine. But Esther saved all of the Jewish people in that region in Persia. She saved them. Haman, however, did not fare as well. Just saying. Mordecai did well after that. You don't hear any more. I could go read more of the midrash concerning her. But it sounds like the offspring King Ahasuerus had with Vashti, those were the children that were in the royal lineage to take position and all those things. So you don't hear anything about the children Esther had with the king or anything like that. But she spoke up. She was afraid. She was fasting. She even had those that worked for her to start fasting. Now, you have some good people around you when you start fasting and you can tell them, fast with me, pray with me. You can't say that to everybody, y'all. Because again, I will always tell you, you need to know if people are doing P-R-A-Y or P-R-E-Y. And she had people around her willing to fast and P-R-A-Y with her. And she got the victory for her people. And her people were able to live in peace. Lifting up another woman, Queen Esther. Bye.